Let's talk panel mode on our Sentro circular knitting machine. My machine is the 48 needle Sentro, but this could also be adapted to the King Addi or the 40 or 20 needle machine as well. So here is how I do my setup for panel mode on my machine. It just takes a little bit more practice, I think, than tube mode, but once you get it down, you're going to love it. When you're going to do panel mode or even tube mode, you want to make sure that your machine is on a very stable and level surface. And then I also use these reusable silicone pads that are sticky. I got them off of Amazon and I cut each pad into fourths and I put it on my suction cups. This helps keep my machine locked down onto my countertop so that it does not move and it will not rock. And that helps make it so I get less drop stitches as long as it's on a stable surface, it's level, and then it's not rocking. Next, we want to make sure our machine is set to panel mode. On the Sentro, on the side of your machine, there is a T that stands for tube mode, and then there's a P that stands for panel mode. So you want to make sure the button's up to the panel mode setting. Now to start our panel mode, I like using a DK number 3 weighted yarn for panel mode, especially when you're beginning because the thinner yarn is easier on your machine. I'm using the Premier 100% acrylic anti-pilling DK yarn. If you're using a number 4 worsted yarn, that can work as well, but just make sure it's a thinner number 4. Thicker number 4s can bind up your machine and bust your needles. For this tutorial, I'm first going to keep it zoomed out like this so you can see the setup and how the whole machine works on panel mode, and then I'm going to do a zoomed in version so you can see better for the cast on and how the yarn works around the needles. On panel mode, we can't use all the needles on the machine. What works best for me is to start at my number 3 needle and end at my 46 needle. I also took a Sharpie and I marked this so it's a nice visual for me to know where my starting and stopping point is. So my number 3 needle here, I have a line, and then on my 46 needle here, I also have a line here. So the 47th, the 48th, the number 1, and the number 2 needle, we are not going to use, and I just have little dots there, and that's just a visual reminder for me that I'm not going to use those needles. So this is for the largest panel. You can do a smaller panel and even use less needles, but for the largest panel to make on the 48 needle machine, this is what works best for me. To start my cast on, I want to make sure I start by cranking forward, so I need to set my machine and crank it back. So I'm at my starting point, it's going to stop. I can't crank anymore. Here, it's stuck and I can only crank forward now. And this is how I like to set it. So I'm working from my number 3 needle, then going to 4, 5, 6, 7 in increments up. So I hook my yarn onto my number 3 needle. Then we're going to do our standard cast on, go behind your next needle, and then in front of the following needle, behind, in front, behind, in front. And we're going to go back and forth like this all the way around. We don't want it too loose and we don't want it overly tight. I call it just kissing the front and back side of the needles. When you're going on the front side of your needles, you want to make sure it's hooked under those hooks and it's pulling the yarn down into the machine. This is for our cast on. And so we're going to go around all the way to our 46 needle because we're trying to make the largest panel that I like to make on the machine. Once we're stopped here at our 46 needle, this is how your cast on should look. So you're over and under each needle, every other one. If you skipped one and it's under 2 or over 2, you want to redo your cast on because you'll get drop stitches. Now I'm putting it all the way down into my yarn holder. From the front all the way to the back, it kind of looks like a little tongue. I'm going to zero out my digital row counter. The regular row counter will not work in panel mode, so I have a digital one. And now we're going to start our first row. I made sure it's under that big tab right there. And now we're going to crank backwards. And so it's going to hook around that tab again. And then it's going to hook on to our 46th needle. As you can see, it's hooking on there now. And we're making our first row. You'll also notice that my left hand is a little bit hard to see, but it's holding onto the yarn. I use that for tension. I don't just rely on the tension bar. Now we're back to our 3rd needle. You want it to hook over the peg right past the 3rd needle. And now we're going to stop. And now we're going to crank forward and it's going to go over that same peg again. and then that third needle comes up and it's going to hook the yarn. And now we're making our second row. Now, sometimes you need to help those end needles to get the yarn to go up, around, and down. They can get caught. And so that's why thinner yarn is better for panel mode, because of it getting caught on that first and last needle. And you'll see it right here again, it kind of got jammed. So I have to help the yarn out a little bit, make sure it goes down and seats around those two tiny little pegs underneath the needle. And what works really good for this is a loom pick if you have one. Now we're going to stop here at this peg right after my 46 needle. And now we're going to start cranking backwards. And a loom pick or a paper clip that you open up works really well to help you with those needles when the yarn gets stuck on them. I'm just using my fingers here, but sometimes for dexterity, that helps people as well. I just couldn't find mine right now, so I'm just using my hands. And so here's how we're going to go back and forth, making as many rows as you want for your panel. Now I'm going to show the same process again, but zoomed in so you can see the needles a little bit better and how that yarn works. Okay, so here we are zoomed in, and we're going to start at our third needle, and I'm going to do my cast on. So we make sure it's hooked down on that third needle and it pulls it down into the machine. Then we go behind, and then in front, behind, in front, behind, in front, behind, in front, till we get to our 46 needle. Again, you don't want it too loose. You don't want it overly tight. It's just kind of kissing the front and back side of these needles for our cast on. And we're going to do this all the way to our 46 needle. Now you want to make sure the yarn, when it goes under the needle, that the yarn is catching and pulling that yarn down into your machine. And this is the standard cast on. Now we are at my 46 needle. I'm behind it. And so we started here at our third, and we've gone all the way around to our 46 needle right here. Now we are going to start with our first row. So we want to make sure it goes down into our yarn holder, and it kind of looks like a little tongue sticking out. So you want to make sure it's all the way in the front, through the back, and into our yarn tension bar. And now we'll start our first row. So here's our 46th needle here. I make sure the yarn is underneath that peg, and then 46 needle, and then that next peg, you want to make sure it's under it. And now we're going to crank backwards, and it's going to go over that peg again right before our 46 needle catches it. So you'll see it goes around, the needle catches it, and it pulls it down. And now we're starting our first row of our panel. And we are cranking backwards at this point, cranking towards us. And we're going to crank back till we get to our third needle. So here's our third needle here. It's going to go over the peg right after the third needle. This peg here. Now we're going to crank forward away from ourselves. And that yarn's going to go over that peg a second time. And then our third needle is going to come up and catch the yarn and pull it down. And now we are starting our second row. And you, at this point is when you might need to start helping out that yarn at your beginning and ends of your rows, because it gets caught on that third and 46 needle a little bit because there's not a lot of weight being able to pull it down. So this is where you can use your fingers like I am here. You can also get a loom pick or open up a little paper clip to help kind of catch that yarn and pull it down over the needle, and then making sure it's around those two pegs. So now we're back. It has to go over that last peg, and then it goes over it again. And now we're starting our next row. And that's the process to do as many rows as you would like. So I'll show it a few more times. So see here how it's getting stuck on that needle. I have to kind of help it out. You'll feel it kind of jam up. So you also want to crank slowly. Don't crank overly fast, because then that's where you can get jammed up. You can get more drop stitches and things like that. So it's a little bit of a slower process on panel mode than it is on tube mode, because it's just a little bit more finicky. But as long as you just kind of take your time and go slowly when you're cranking your rows, you'll be able to make panels really easy. And this is why thinner yarn is better as well, just because you can see how it gets stuck on those beginning and ending needles. The other thing I recommend for panel mode is to always do a waste yarn cast on. So I'm going to show this. So this yarn that I have put on here, I'm going to do about 10 rows, and I'm going to consider this my waste yarn or a scrap yarn that's not a part of the project. And I'm going to show you how to add on more yarn to do your project yarn, or say if you're cranking out a lot of rows and need to change color or you need to add on a new yarn skein, I'll show you how to do that next on panel mode. Okay, so now I've cranked out about 10 or so rows, and this is going to be considered my waste yarn. It's in a different color from my project yarn, so I'm able to identify what's a part of my project and what's not. I'm ending back at my starting point at my third needle. I'm going to cut this, and I'm going to put the tail end of my scrap yarn or my waste yarn in the middle of my machine. Now I'm going to take my project yarn, and I'm going to put it in my machine, making sure it's all the way down into my yarn holder, all the way into the front. That looks like that little tongue sticking out. You want to make sure it's seated all the way down and into there. And we want to hook it onto our number 3 needle, because that is our starting needle. You can see I have marked there with the Sharpie. So we're going to make sure our yarn is on the other side of the peg of my third needle. And then you're going to want to hold on to the tail ends of the yarn so that third needle catches the yarn here. Now you can see the waste yarn is caught on my second needle. That's okay. It's just going to pop it back up and it's going to fall off when we come back. So that's no big deal. Now that I have it hooked on there, and you want to kind of a long tail so it doesn't come out of the machine, we're making our first row of now considered our project yarn. You'll also see here I have a claw weight. This is something that can help your project as well. I got mine off of Amazon. Gives weight to help pull the fabric down around those needles. And now we're just doing the normal back and forth like we did with our yellow yarn. We're starting our second row. Now we're back to our third needle. You kind of want to just hold those tail ends to help with tension. And now we're starting our third row, and I'm kind of just pulling those tail ends of the yarn so to make sure everything's has a similar tension since we're starting new yarn. I'm back to my 46, still helping out the yarn a little bit to make sure it's seated all the way down, it's not getting stuck. And now doing my next row. Back to my third needle. It goes over the peg, start cranking back, it goes over the peg again, hooks that third needle, and we're starting our next row. Another thing you can use is a binder clip to help with weights. You'll see I've put one on the other side. You can also use a binder clip if you don't have a claw weight. Again, just helping out this yarn as it goes around. And when we get back to our starting point, you'll see that binder clip I have set up on there. So that's another option you can do. So I'll continue showing back and forth how to do the rows on panel mode just so you can see how it works. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the project yarn I'm using here. This was from a local yarn shop, and it's a hand-dyed yarn made locally. It's considered a sport weight or a fingerling yarn, so more like a number 2 weighted yarn. And this one is a silk and wool yarn blend. So you can use acrylic yarn, synthetic fibers, or you can use natural fibers like wool, cotton, silk. When you're picking out a yarn, you just want to make sure it's not too thick. I never use number 5 bulky weight yarns. They are way too thick for my machine and it binds it up. Number 4 worsted weight yarns will work, but you want to make sure they're on a thinner side and they're not too thick, or else it's going to bind up like it does for the bulky number 5. And then when you're looking at the yarn itself, especially if you're looking at natural fibers like a wool, I use alpaca wool, but I make sure it's the baby alpaca because it's really nice and thin and silky. And it doesn't have the fibers that catch each other, so that's not going to bind up the machine either. And then again, when I do panel mode, I can get away, I feel like, with thicker yarn when you're in tube mode for like the number 4 worsted. But on panel mode, since it gets caught on these the number 3 and like the 46 needle, your starting and stopping needle, I tend to go for like the number 2 and the number 3 weighted yarns. It just seems to help the machine way better in panel mode. So I hope this tutorial helps you with doing panel mode on your machine. If you have any questions about panel mode or on the circular knitting machines, please let me know in the comments. Hit that like and follow button for more tutorials, helpful tips, and free projects. I have my channel here on TikTok as well as on YouTube as well. It's the same handle. And thank you so much for watching. I appreciate all of your likes and follows and your support. Happy crafting, everybody.